most recent customer survey for MDM, in which all respondents replied they were very interested in receiving additional training from us. We decided to roll out our quarterly training event. We already have user guides, manuals, ICDs, as well as plentiful documentation that we recognize that we offer in addition to specific topic training events from time to time as well. We felt that providing these trainings would give folks a more in-depth ability to learn about our data products as well as ask questions. With that being said, I would like to introduce to you today our two presenters. We have Luis Lee, and Nagesh Puli. They are part of our forward engineering team, otherwise known as the FET for MDM. They will be providing today's trainings. We do have two for you today. We have a part 1 and we have a part 2. Folks are free to join for part 1 and part 2 at your own leisure. And an overview as to what we're doing for our trainings. Basically, we plan to cover MDM's program, organization, and relationship domain, as this is our central data repository for CMS's payment models. We at MDM capture beneficiary and provider alignment period information for alignment overlaps evaluations, especially for shared savings-based models in our POR domain. This data is then made available to business users for overlap operations and analysis. For part 1 of today's training, we're going to be covering our MDM payment models for general audience. This session's basically going to provide an overview of how MDM is helping with the agency's mission in order to give you a deeper dive into our POR domain and to shed light on our advanced payment models implemented by CMMI and how CMMI leverages our MDM system to store their data and support their business functions. We'll also cover some stakeholders' roles at this time. And also information will be provided on how users can get access to the MDM system and materials. Our part 2 training will be based primarily on our MDM payment model data training for data users and contractors. And this session is basically a walkthrough of our POR ICD document, which explains how to get access to the data. We will walk through also for our business users what they would need to do in order to troubleshoot while trying to get access to the information and how to use the information within the POR data. So with that being said, again, if folks wouldn't mind putting their phones on mute until they have questions or comments they would like to share, I'm going to turn over our training to our presenters, Luis Lee and Nagesh Puli. Feel free to please view if you would like to follow along our training. We do have a WebEx currently running, and that is in the meeting invite, a link if you would like to get on WebEx. Or feel free if you would like to follow along through YouTube. There is also a link to get onto the YouTube channel at CMS to follow along as well. Lastly, if you would like copies of today's trainings, we will be providing those to all of those on our meeting invite after today's training event has ended. So, Luis, I'm going to turn this over to you now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So this is, first of all, thank you for joining. I think there was a mix-up on the meeting invite, and apologies. I think wanted to make it clear. It does start at 1, and if for most of the general audience, hopefully you'll find the part 1 interesting, which that's the part where I'm going to cover. For part 2, again, is more data intensive. So, Laura, I'm like looking at Laura because I know you're a program lead. It's up to you if you want to stay in. You know, one thing. This is kind of odd. So just give us some time to get used to, because this is formality times 100 with what MDM we're used to. What I want to convey, and I think you see the screen here. I never had any ambition to be a YouTuber, but I guess now I am one. And
Baby Shark.
Right. I do want to convey, I think there's a lot of folks who worked with us, and some folks here that more or less just heard my voice over the phone. But I do want to convey that this is the formality, despite the formality of this subject area, it is very, especially if you're a direct stakeholder, it is very sort of relationship oriented. I think that one thing is there are all these large systems, but in MDM, it works a lot better. I will say if we're talking to each other freely and openly and non like just it, with the big benefit of doubt, because there's such a space in MDM where you might not understand something, but before you have a lot of questions about it, definitely engage with one another. I sort of want to emphasize that, and so that's the thing I wanted to emphasize. Maybe that's the benefit. I don't want to know. I don't, I'm trying to convey that sort of hopefully attitude for MDM. And lastly, before I really get into it, the way we develop this training is for the general audience. However, and which kind of covers all the key parts in broad strokes. But there are direct stakeholders like Laura and other folks in other payment model that submit data to MDM that you might have questions afterwards about some specific items with MDM. Feel free to reach out to us. Nagesh is very, very, very available, like as far as reachable, easy to talk to, and so I do want to emphasize that. And lastly, also finding the sweet spot for this meeting is sort of a challenging aspect and some cohesion and everything. But the way we developed this program, and this is our first shot at it, so bear with us. But the way we want to develop this program is to have every key subject area for the business processes working hand in hand with MDM. And I can safely say, if you know, because we spent hours on this, if you know everything what we're talking about here, you're in good shape, Laura.
What is the MDM?
Yeah, good. And so how we wanted to start this is not going to read off the slides. Let me see if I have control over my laptop. Somebody might have control. I'm going to try not to read off the slides too much. I think Jill might have mentioned this, but if you want the meeting materials, please send me an email. It's really important that you use these materials hand in hand with the recording or the audio, because some of these points will not be as emphasized in the slides. And the reason for that is just we're trying to make sure that everybody understands, not with context from these slides. So, and Laura, you kind of opened up to a good question for me. And sorry, you're sitting right in front of me. In that we want to, right, we want to, part of this training, if you look, I'm not going to read it off, it's important to understand the undercurrent and the principles of MDM and how that influences up to what you're doing every day using as a payment model stakeholder. Okay, so I'm just gonna go into it. Let's dive right into it, and hopefully keep it.
Can take a moment?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm Nagesh Pulia. I'm from Next Phase. We are contractors for MDM. With me is Chandra Kondur. He's a technical subject matter expert, architect. And if you have any technical questions as well, don't hold it. Just go hit it right with us, and we'll definitely answer that. The goal of this whole interactive session is to clear any confusion or any doubts that you have on the subject, and then go forward and collaborate with us. Thank you. Sorry.
Good. Sounds good. All right. So, what is the MDM? The other part I wanted to convey is we're passionate about this subject area. It's not it doesn't, maybe for a lot of data systems, you may interact with folks who are not necessarily passionate about, what they're doing, not naming names, but I wanted to say there is a principle behind MDM, not just what it is from how you interact. And what it's important to understand from master data management perspective. This is just general master data management. It is tackling a problem, which is you have large enterprises with the same data, and there's a common problem. It just happens. And I could tell you for hours why it happens, but that's not really the point, although it's interesting. But you have a large enterprise, usually like CMS, and you have a common problem. You have the same data in multiple places. And that's the problem that MDM is just trying to tackle. It tackles in various ways, from a technology standpoint, from like a master data management practice standpoint, from I don't know, a lot of business process standpoint. It is in many ways, once this is a recognized problem, and this was officially recognized as a problem in CMS, which is not a surprise, many, many years ago, the way sort of this practice starts usually is organic in many ways. The architecture is developed organically, but it starts from a business data problem, which is, well, I've got data here about a customer and the data here about another customer, and how do I merge this data? And you're not just talking about two places, you're talking about multiple places. And so that's really the principle of what master data management is trying to tackle. Now, the way this works up into CMS, and not really reading off the slides again, is if I go to next part, I'm trying to explain to you how this impacts any large organization, such as CMS. Now, it's once you start to digest that problem, you start to realize, well, having a single access go-to system would be great. Now, one thing that you hear often, the problem itself is a lot more complicated than you would think. It's not impossible. It's definitely doable. It takes a lot of engagement with multiple stakeholders, but one of the problems, one of the value systems, I should say, not problems, but value for MDM would be to have that single place go to for key data. And the second example I state here is by having a single source of key data, it has cascading effects of improving data quality because people will not have multiple versions of here, Paul Benning here and Paul Benning there, but people will have a single view of Paul Benning uniquely, the person sitting right over here in front of me. So now, sorry, Paul, and I think this is one of those things where, not that you have the luxury to think about, but for us, the more we digest it, the more we realize the huge value and opportunity or risk mitigation regarding data that you have when you have a fully mature MDM in place. Okay? So this is just a kind of digging into the principle. Now all I stated here as a slideshow is there are just 2 points, but there are many other points I can show you. We just didn't want to bore you with all these, like value system and value proposition MDM right off the bat. Now, as far as what MDM is for CMS, some of you have seen this slide. It is basically our sort of standard go-to. We're trying to keep it consistent with every message, every opportunity in here, so that everyone at CMS has a fundamental foundational understanding of what master data management is at CMS. And so here are the key points of MDM at CMS. One, it is a shared service in that it is that single access point where multiple verticals, multiple organizations, multiple programs can go to have a view of a provider or Benny. Two, MDM as CMS. Now, I kind of didn't explain much earlier, but part of the exercise of determining what master data management looks like in an organization is to identify your key business data. At CMS, what we identify our key business data is providers, beneficiaries among Medicare and Medicaid. So if you just kind of understand that core, then you would understand what kind of data we store at MDM. And finally, the third part about MDM and CMS is to make sure that this is integrated and harmonized across multiple systems. Now, as an example, we have provider data from our PACOS and KEYS and MPES system. If you ever work with those systems, I'm kind of not the expert in here in this room, but there's humongous, there are large challenges to try to integrate it and harmonize provider data across those systems. In short, not only that, but across Medicare and Medicaid. And so MDM has been working to integrate and harmonize the provider data into a single view. But it's not just provider data of who you are as a provider, but provider data of who are you participating with as a model. So in here, the focus of the subject area today is more payment model centric. But if you've worked at CMMI with all the innovation models, they have participations with individual providers and bennies, and it's, I'm sure multiple providers are participating in multiple models, and so it is very important to make sure that CMMI has a single view of that provider so that they don't have any overlaps with one another if there is any. Okay. You want to add anything over there? Just, oh, good. Okay, good. All right, good. So this is our sort of, hopefully the principles are being understood in here. If I go to the, now going to the next slide.
For
Now,
Medicaid, it was never included before, right? We're just starting to integrate that?
Right. So right now, as we speak, the data is getting pumped into our environment.
Cool.
So the first step is to pump in the individual Medicaid providers. That's what we have integrated. So it's going through our IBM InfoSphere, which is an MDM engine to do ID resolution. And once that churning of data is done, then we'll enrich our provider data mart with Medicaid providers, individual Medicaid.
Cool, so the states can like use the data and have the same data and
Right.
same format. That's cool.
yes.
Yeah, and it's all harmonized in our provider data mart. So I confirmed what it means is you'll get taste of Medicaid providers and NPES data from NPES, which is all providers in USA, and then your Medicaid providers to tag along with. Also, to make it clear, we are continuing our development to integrate facilities and organization group practices as well into data mart. That's development which is in progress. And as per our roadmap, it looks like around August, September, we should be able to be live and pump that data in as well.
To be honest with you, it's always encouraging. That's part of the purpose of what the example that you just gave me. We really want everybody in here to start connecting the dots, and you know, exactly what I was hoping for. To be honest with you, so great.
It's an early success. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I've never worked with Medicaid, but I know that's a big problem for them.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so here's the thing. Now, sort of digging in through the sort of the principles of MDM and starting to connect the dots. What is MDM for payment models? Here, You know, it doesn't show, but it took a long time for me to kind of write up the slide. Here's the thing. I think generally, generally, the way MDM is for payment models today is primarily for, or right now exclusively for shared savings-based model, and to be a repository, because these models have a particular sort of demonstration activity that is, honestly, shared savings-based, but demonstration activity that you cannot participate at the same time with another model. Therefore, you need a central repository to be able to capture that data in a central location and resolve those overlap issues. The idea, though, it's not just kind of throwing data into the central repository. You also have to have administration and sort of the technology activity to make sure when this data is going into a central repository is being done so that you could formulate an apples-to-apples comparison with one model and another. That's really the big thing, but CMS payment model has various terminologies, which I'm going to cover a little bit right now, but I'm calling it CMS payment models. Others may call alternate payment models. Internally, we call the POR domain. Some may call it demonstrations. Others may call it just models or programs. So I do want to emphasize that what is MDM for CMS payment model that I'm talking about here is primarily for those engaging in overlap activities, business overlap alignment activities. Okay, that makes sense. And through that, there is an input of the data into MDM, and there is an output, there is extracts, there is services that the Geshe's team all set it up and so forth. So there's a whole operation behind that. Okay. That's good. All right. Now, just so everybody knows, here's the, this is the one-pager sheet that all the data that is in MDM. I put the ones that are concluded in there just because that has been an interest in the past, folks who want to look at historical data. But, and the way, these are the individual payment models. And I think if you're interested in the slide, you'll see this. And so I think the one thing I want to point out here is that with each payment model that we talked about and we engage with each other as stakeholder, they all have an acronym of some sorts, and they have working with programs in MDM, they have a program ID. Okay. So if you're working directly with MDM, you know that as a model, you have to know which model ID you are. Okay. Simple enough? All right.
Can I ask a quick question about that slide? It says as of March 2018. Is that true, or so there have been updates since then?
Looking at it, yeah, it's still current. This is still current.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I think it's worth mentioning. One particular area is do not get confused with Medicare Savings Program, MSSP, with what we're talking about shared savings-based model. All of these models, actually most of these models are shared savings-based. Okay. All right, now getting into some of the key terminologies that I already started talking about. We talk about payment models. I mentioned you can sometimes refer them as programs, not to be confused with CMS programs like Medicare and Medicaid. And they are sometimes referred to as demos, but within MDM space itself, what we are really talking about is primarily shared savings-based models that submit data to MDM. Okay. The second terminology is that's I think important to understand working in this space is POR. Now, it stands for Program Organization Relationship. The main thing with what payment models are sending to MDM is not necessarily who your provider is or beneficiary. It's the combination of telling us who is the provider that you're sending, in which I had a relationship or alignment between a start and end date. So to summarize, you're not just sending the demographic or the information of the provider, but you're also sending the provider along with when did you engage in this provider. Very important to understand, because I think a lot of the confusion that happens is it overlooks the fact that we're not talking about providers engaging in the same timeline. We're talking about providers or beneficiaries engaging in different timelines and different and different programs. So that sort of confuses folks as far as if that's a true overlap. So I think that when you talk to us and when you talk to some of the staff members, when we talk about POR, know that we're talking about this area. Questions?
What's FCHCO?
Duals.
Is it concluded or is that a current one?
It's still, yeah, that's Duals Program 11.
FAI?
Yep. Financial demonstration.
Okay.
Now, beyond POR, we are capturing 4 types of data. I mentioned this again, the program itself, who you are, IH, SSP, Pioneer, NGACO, CEC, duals. That's one aspect of the data that we capture in POR. The second aspect of the second type of data that we capture in POR is the organization itself. That is broadly defined within MDM. For SSP, for example, there are ACOs. For CEC, there are ESCOs. For duals, there are states. Now, this is very important because you work with CMS, you have provider organizations and so forth. And we're trying to emphasize here these are large organization entities that facilitate those alignments. So it's broadly defined. Now, that's part of the challenge of trying to model this into MDM. But Nagesh is going to cover this a little bit more. But it's more important to define the organization per model than just kind of leave it as just organization. For example, if I'm talking to CEC, I'm not going to be referring to CEC as, hey, what's your organization that is aligned for these providers of bennies? I'm going to be talking to CEC in a manner of more of, hey, what are the ESCOs that are participating under these providers and beneficiaries? ESCO being the unique identified organization for CEC. Okay? Same deal with SSP. I will be talking to SSP about organizations such as, hey, your organization has these providers, but when I engage with SSP, I'm going to be talking about their type of organization, which are ACOs. Hey, these providers are engaging in these ACOs. So because it's broadly defined, it's part of the challenge of trying to harmonize the data across multiple models. That's how we broadly defined. Okay, and the third and fourth, straightforward. As mentioned before, we capture provider data and beneficiary relationships. It's not just provider who you are or beneficiary who you are, but it's the relationship aspect, which is your Benny between the start and end date, and this provider between the start and end date. So we are always talking in those terminologies when you engage with CMS Payment models. All right, let's see. Now, finally, another key terminology which has come up more recently, more often than not, is the idea of active, inactive, and end dating in MDM. In MDM, because operationally is capturing all these shared savings-based models, part of the business process of the shared savings business model is that alignments go in and out. And so the way MDM constructed this is to make sure that if alignment is currently active, that means relationship is currently, it could mean currently active as far as it's aligned today, participating today, or active in the future, or active historically. So when we're talking about being active, it also means historically active, meaning that alignment has occurred in the past. When we're talking about inactive, it means that this alignment has at one point been active, but subsequently a model sent data to MDM to say this particular relationship, any or provider relationship, has never been active. So it has never occurred. That's the key thing. And finally, end dating, which is something that an aspect of MDM that everyone should know, is that if the venue or provider finished its alignment with a model, you have to make sure you end date that relationship. And this has been an issue more recently because what it looked like in the data is that folks who submit data to MDM, and if they do not know the default end data, they will put 12/31/999s in the end date. However, we want to make sure all the models are actively updating their relationship start and end dates. So we're trying to make sure when you're done with these alignments, make sure you end date to the specific end date that that model, that venue or provider stopped the relationship. Okay? So it makes it kind of wordy, but hopefully that sort of makes sense.
Hey, Luis, to make those things make the most sense, something that ties that all together that hasn't really been said, but is covered, and I think we kind of assume people understand, is when we talk about MDM and this POR data being this repository and a place to evaluate alignments, it's the fact that these statuses or these terms only make sense when you remember MDM is not trying to enforce a business rule that would reject a piece of data that somebody submits. So when we talk about inactive or end dating, when we say that something was a mistake or was pre-aligned and then it was dropped, this is the system where people are submitting data where they can then have a first chance to evaluate that relationship against other potential relationships and determine, well, we can't have an overlap. This is the place where you can evaluate those types of rules. So you could be sitting here, if you don't know what we're talking about, you could be sitting here like trying to grasp the concept of, well, why? I mean, because you would think some operational systems, you would obviously reject something if you say this overlap shouldn't occur. MDM does not make that judgment. It's not for this POR data, it is not to make that judgment. There are validation rules that occur to make sure that the data being submitted is valid in the format that dates are formatted correctly and things like that. But if there are overlaps that occur, because what those rules are for overlap change over time, we have always, and this is part of the reason why you see things like historically active. What does Luis mean? Like, what does that mean? Well, that's because at one point, something may have been allowed. And then an overlap rule could change that says a program could not be participating in these two programs, these two different payment models. Usually the rules are pretty consistent from up front, right? Because CMS usually wants to know how they would validly be able to pay somebody for something. So, and programs want to know that too. So, but the reason why these terms might seem a little hard to grasp is you really have to understand MDM for the POR data is simply catching, capturing, storing, and being able to send that data back and allow for the overlaps evaluations to occur. So if you didn't get that part before, and I don't think we explicitly stated it, that hopefully makes those terms make a little bit more sense and can let you grasp them a little bit better. So.
Yeah, Paul, I mean, to just add what you're saying, I'm trying to make this as cohesive as possible, but if you understand the terminologies and that principle that Paul's talking about, then you're okay. I think the challenge with the PR domain for MDM is not necessarily how we capture the data, although that is challenging itself. It's the process and operational aspects of having all these different siloed programs to work together, and MDM being the go in between for all of them. So those are the it's more the operational aspects that's more challenging rather than kind of understanding the depth of the data of what is being sent to MDM.
So can I ask another question? When you find an issue where it is in the data that there is a provider who is participating in two different models that are not allowed to participate like that, how do you resolve that?
Good question. I have a slide for that.
Okay.
Yeah, great question.
But I mean, at this point, I just want you to I want to make sure people understand that the thing is, MDM, the system, the data storage piece, doesn't make that value judgment about it being invalid. Really, I wanted to make sure people got that, because at this point, if you're thinking, and if you think the future slide is going to say, well, how do we reject that? We really don't. We become the platform by which you can, this is the first chance for the data to be intermingled to see that there might be something that's an invalid alignment. So that's actually why, otherwise, the original design would have been a sharing of, if there were 30 active models at any given time, everybody having to share their 30 files with all 30 people, and you end up getting a lot of lines going across. So this is just that. So the term central repository was actually that, more of a central point that then it can all be looked at to evaluate that it is invalid, otherwise you would never know it, because it's not all in one place.
Got it.
So that's the concept to get.
Got it.
Yeah.
Completely. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to just keep on building upon what Paul is saying here. Now, this is a slide just for everyone to see. This is what we offer: data extracts, analytics, and services. Yeah, I mean, it sounds good. Like, we have products and services for customers. What I really wanted to emphasize here is the second part of what we offer, because I can tell you a number of you who've done this for many, many years, and going through the exercise of merging all this data and making an apples-to-apples optimizing the apples-to-apples comparison and optimizing understanding variations of providers and many coming in for Medicare and Medicaid. Well, all of that built a practice within our team, which is, I'm looking at Nagesh, I'm looking at Chandra here, just a practice within our team that has, we just frankly became subject matter experts in that area. And so what I want to emphasize is here, yes, we offer extracts, analytic, and services, data services, and which you're going to cover a bit more. But as a general audience member, I want to say, if you're wrestling with trying to see consolidated data forms from CMS, especially for bennies and providers, just reach out to us. We're very accessible. I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay? Now, I'm going to cover. I'm sorry. I'm going to cover that because I think that's definitely something we have to talk about as far as how does these overlap gets resolved. So, before building up to that, just stating, I think most of the users here came from the overlaps committee or operational support. But as a stakeholder, generally, I wanted to, because sometimes we get someone may reach out to myself or Nagesh or operations support, like who's who, and I wanted to just lay out the stakeholders all in one place to say, on the business side end of things, there are the CMS payment models, and I see one over here, Laura, and there are others on the phone. And with those business payment model leads or point of contacts, we have model contractors that support the payment models. And for all the business overlap support from a business standpoint and overlap hierarchies and supporting that whole process itself, that's CMMI BSG, and you've worked with Ashley Corbin and Felicia and Melissa and Kelly, and I think they're also on the phone. On the more technology stewardship side, there's the OIT MDM team, and Paul is part of the OIT MDM team. And as far as the technology stewards itself, working directly with MDM, Nagesh, you're a representative in here, and I think we have additional representatives here. So the purpose of the slide is more because I think from a payment model perspective, you kind of see this one MDM as one catch-all, but actually there are particular stakeholders that cover different areas of responsibility. So, now, going along with trying to just principally, just giving the principles here, what I did, this will be beneficial, especially for folks who's going to be requesting the slide. We created a cheat sheet of all the key important data when working with MDM POR. So I've mentioned, this is particularly important for payment model contractors and payment model point of contacts, because when you're engaging with MDM and when you're trying to formulate and resolve overlaps, you always want to speak this, this is just trying to formulate the single harmonized, cohesive language of business data. So for a program that I mentioned back, and I think I'm just going to go in here. Can somebody mute the phone, please? We have some static in here. Great. So I mentioned POR captures 4 types of data. Now this is really connecting the dots, starting to connect the dots with the data to what actually is being captured in MDM. For a program, what's essentially happening is you're sending in the payment model ID and you're telling MDM, I am a payment model that has intent to send the data to MDM. That's just sort of setting up the business data in MDM. But the important thing I want to point out especially for the model leads, is all the notifications, the production notifications that you received is controlled through the program file. So you want to make sure that your contractors keep this payment model contact email address updated accordingly, okay? So that's really the program data. For organization data, I think organization itself, for example, in SSP, they have ACO IDs. That's identifying uniquely what that ACO is to the SSP model. As well, I think ESCOs also have ESCO IDs as well. But it's just to state that you have to make sure you're able to uniquely identify your organization back to your business data. And secondly, more importantly, perhaps for downstream users, what kind of organization type are you sending it to us? This is to state what I mentioned before, that, hey, I'm SSP and I'm sending you what we call ACOs. Hey, I'm CEC, I'm sending you what we call ESCOs. Hey, I'm duos, I'm sending you what we call state. So the organization type code is identifying for downstream users what kind of organization you're sending to us, okay? And finally, ACOs, ESCOs, and other types of organizations, they all have, like many and providers, they all have an engagement start date and end date. And so that's I talked about the MDM provider relationship, but even the ACOs and ESCOs and other types of organizations have a shelf life, perhaps, of how long they all the time periods, all the time start and end dates that participate in those models. Okay, so just want to make sure you're aware of those key business data and other key business data that I wanted to point out. Providers and bennies for this slide. So for provider, it's the way MDM identifies provider for payment models or POR is by using the combination of tax ID number and the MPI. Okay. That's the way mostly CMMI identifies the provider that you are dealing with. And again, because this is relationship data, you always be mindful of the affiliation start date and provider affiliation end date.
So, I'm sorry, I have another question. If a provider is terminated, not leaving Medicare on their own, does that get reflected here?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's like you're stating a use case that we want to leverage, because I'm just talking about the payment models, but there's a whole world of MDM that will be able to identify terminated providers, and we want to see if they're still participating in the payment model, for example. So those use cases, we start to connect other areas of MDM. We're barely just scratching the surface.
Yeah. So let me though add on to this. I mean, backing up for one piece of scope, keep in mind, Luis is describing the data submission process, how the data comes in when this cheat sheet is listing file types. So this is just the groundwork for then. I mean, it's as straightforward as I can get of a relational database where you're taking flat files and plunking them into these relational. So when he says relationship, he's literally like, it's only enforced in that the data that's submitted shows the relationship of the, a TIN or NPI for a provider. In the case that you just asked about, likely that a payment model may receive information that says the provider is a participant in that model with a begin date, possibly an open-ended end date for that provider. If there is a termination, we would expect that the payment model would have an end date when they do another submission to reflect it, that there was a termination, but it is not a rule that we add a termination date, which then doesn't get into this file format coming in, but I think you're talking more about how we then update what the table space is, that then we have extracts and there's other services that come off of it. So kind of talking through the whole use case, we would expect that they should, but the use case that Luis is hinting at is saying, we have provider data in these other realms where we could be informing that. And if there was a business rule that said that this should be, it could be updated. But really what we're trying to, these tables purely reflect what was submitted, so we have an auditable, trackable history, so that, in the case of CMMI wanting to know what was submitted from the different payment models, they know exactly what they submitted, and then they would tie things to like reconciliations on payments and things like that, right? Where they'd say, we want to make sure that the payments are accurately reflected, so we need that corrected. Then they would usually push back on the payment model to ensure that the corrected information is sent in, which could have an end date that was sometime in the past by the time that it actually gets corrected and submitted. Especially when you saw some of those one of the tables that just listed what the programs and the model numbers were, when you saw that things were submitted monthly or not even monthly, it could be happening after the fact. So does that, it's the whole scope of the fact that we're just at that beginning point of showing how the data flows in, but this doesn't even really get into it is very purely stored based upon what you see here. But the questions you're having are more about then how and what is done with that data as it comes out. So it's important to know that these are very specific terms, and even if you're not a submitter of data, it's important to know this is the process that it goes through, right? So.
Yeah, I want to add a couple more things. So I get really excited when we talk use cases, right? So to extending what you're saying, so let's assume if a provider has a sanction imposed against the provider, right? So we capture the data. We get it from PAYCOs, from Medicare enrollment, right? So what it means is model teams. Now, if you're a model team, you can subscribe to a web service that we have. We build a RESTful API, and you can subscribe to that and get that information right away and perform appropriate action on your end as well to terminate that provider from the program.
Good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks. I was like, I'm getting excited. It's seriously, I don't know if I look at the camera, I can convince you guys.
So do you have a catalog of APIs that explain what we've done?
Yeah.
Yes,
That we shared?
definitely we'll share.
Which ones we consume?
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to mention, I said scratching the surface. Actually, I wanted to say that all of this have been in place for a while. Most of these components. The thing I'm talking about scratching the surface is we really started to turn that page where MDM is engaging more closely with the business to fully leverage all these technology components that the MDM has put in.
So the question about documentation of services, good question. I was going to say it when you had the slide up that showed extracts and services. So it's interesting, we have documentation, but it can become overwhelming. So the idea of having these quarterly training sessions was that we received feedback that said, I think Joel probably tipped off with some of this while I was waiting to sign people in, but the focus right after we got off this slide was the human interaction piece, the knowledge that we can share. So that's a lot of the focus here, but we have documentation, but people don't know what they don't know, right? So they wouldn't know to look for or ask for the documentation unless you now understand some of what the use case is. Now it would make more sense, because if you just read the documentation, you can get lost very quickly and very easily. And this way, we hope it makes the entirety of it make sense. So if people need to seek some of the documentation and other things that we have, and know that we're offering to, we can talk with people and help them understand how they might be able to use something. So.
Yeah, I mean, it could be as simple as, I don't know how to explain it, but I think MDM can do this. You just reach out in that manner, and we can help put those pieces together.
Because for all the documentation that goes behind everything that's sitting here on the slides that he has up now, it's become a mishmash of words unless which is why we're offering this, and we're trying to offer the quarterly training to get through some of these other data domains too, because we heard that that's really something people are interested in.
Yeah, and just to kind of move along with the slides, the business data sheets. The key, not to just kind of read off, but these are the components of the provider data from a payment model perspective, what you submit. We just want to make sure that we're able to identify a provider, and you tell us when were you affiliated or aligned to this provider from the start and end date. Same thing with beneficiary. What I'm really stating here is to let what you're doing to MDM is you're telling us the beneficiary that you're have an alignment with and the start and end date. I added a Benny category code because operationally, Benny category code is something that has been coming up on the overlap side, and this Benny category code tells MDM and therefore other payment models in what status is that Benny participating in for that particular model. So here's the thing about this business cheat sheet. Just frankly, if you kind of understand this business data cheat sheet, which is hopefully not extensive, I don't think it's extensive, then you're in good shape as a program lead to be able to engage and manage through. So if you understand this, you're good.
When you decide the model program IDs, is there like a a scheme behind them, or is it just like the next number in the line?
Next number in line.
Okay.
Yeah,
You noticed that there was some skipping.
Yes.
We're gonna be honest, right? Well, in some cases, yeah, I mean, it was just, but it is kind of it's
So like, does it
generally
mean
been
anything?
an incrementing
Okay.
scheme, and then there were some that
Yeah.
were, we would like a number assigned, but then didn't pan out, and things like this, but so.
Yeah,
the whole
I
bit,
mean,
yeah.
the folks that control this is MDM and QPP, and basically we just pick it up for, hey, what's the next amount available? That's it.
And having those incremental numbers help us on the back end for database partitioning, and also we can evenly distribute and get data quickly. So that's
Now, getting into overlaps, alignments, hierarchies, because it's not that bad from MDM side, it's actually a lot of customer engagement that is always fun. But I can tell you, I'm going to talk about some best practices. And I can tell you it's a lot better now. We're all much more friendlier with one another than has been in the past. So, but good human reasons why. But
Can I add a few things
Sure.
before we go? Sorry to cut you off, Luis.
Sure.
So I want to say we've been supporting CMMI and this overlap function from right about 2012 onwards. So back when for the lack of better words, let me call it MDM 1.0, when that was designed, what we saw is, let's take the provider data coming in from this overlap files, alignment files, store it in our provider subject area. Likewise, beneficiaries coming in, store it in our beneficiary subject area. And that's again to enrich the provider data set and Beni data set. But what it caused is, dependencies in the interface. So if we were loading provider data, we had to hold off processing certain files that we get from CMMI. So eventually with MDM 2.0, which we went live in tail end of 2017 and 2018, early 2018, we've removed that dependencies. So that way we have enabled CMMI to, hey, you send a file, we can quickly process it without any hesitation. Also, one aspect, one trouble that was always there is coordination of, okay, who is going to send this file first, who is going to send that file first, and then a huge burden on the operations team and also on the business group side. So right here, Felicia is sitting here, and Louis had a lot of trouble in terms of coordinating it. So we enabled them by introducing alignment calendar. So basically, they create a file with a schedule, which kind of is a pre-agreed between model teams to say, okay, you send this file now, you send this file now, and then once that's loaded into MDM, there's a schedule off of which our processes run automatically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Louis, sorry, and the program ID, really it's a coordinated effort also. As soon as we know which model is coming, we'll work with others. But as you notice, not every CMMI model has a program ID. It's only those in MDM currently.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Nagesh is talking about, I was thinking about this, is what we're really trying to do is lower the, every opportunity we can where technology can improve to make MDM more of a well-oiled machine. Basically, just there's been a lot of good things that's been developed over the years. Yeah, and those are the two examples that we showed. Thanks, Nagesh. There's a lot more, but I don't want to. That would be patting you on the back for, I mean, yeah. So it's just like, yeah. All right. So here's overlap, alignments, hierarchies. Oh, great stuff. Now, how the order of alignment in any given month is established. Let me just say these are just general principles and guidelines that I'm talking about. Mainly though, before getting into this, it's a lot of just good communications within the overlap group context. And that's primarily it. But not to just kind of vaguely leave it off of that. Now, generally, how alignment is established is 2 months before the upcoming year, we'll just kind of work out the whole year. And part of that, the upcoming year. So we're in 2019 now, and sometime in October, we'll just kind of work out the 2020 schedule. And the way that's worked out is based on the 2019 schedule. Now let's shift the weekends, business holidays, and so forth. And it's more or less in a draft form, just to keep it as consistent. That's our baseline. So that's mainly doing the baseline. Now, over the course of the year, things will change. That's why we have the monthly review, that's the third part. But how the schedule itself influences the calendar. If you're coming up to an upcoming year, it's not necessarily for overlap precedence or anything. It could be for different reasons. So one, it could be because that's when your business data is available and I want to try to send it off to MDM as soon as possible. That's one. Or two, it could be because that's when my contractors are available and that's when I want to send to MDM as soon as possible. Or three, it could be overlap business rules. It's more convenient for me if SSP goes before me because I have all these rules against SSP and I don't want to go back to them and eliminate a line. You just kind of communicate with us. This is where we kind of fit the best. Or you communicate with us to say, hey, we're at the bottom of the totem pole here, all right, we'll go at the end of the month. And so it's just a lot of communication. And somehow it all fits. But it's not, and knowing though, it has to be flexible. A lot of things change. Hey, we got some delays in MDM because somebody sent 2 billion records, not 2 billion, I'm just kind of giving that example, but, or hey, my business data isn't ready, we need extra time. So throughout the week, throughout the month, we work that out. I will say that one thing I want to emphasize here is if you have any questions or any issues with any of the scheduling or just alignment calendar or business process, the first thing you should do is think about submitting a CR into SharePoint, which I'll cover that later on. That's generally how alignments are started. This is the alignment calendar sample. I'm going to go back to it. It's kind of in an awkward spot in this slide, but what you see here is, I hope it's not as visible in here, but folks online will be able to see. This is on SharePoint, and this is just an example of how everyone has their own slots of their alignment load process. So having said that, let's see. I'll go back to it and just explain it further, but generally, here's what this calendar is really trying to represent. It's wordy, so I'll try to explain it as succinctly as possible. The idea of this calendar mainly is to try to minimize overlaps within MDM. But it also needs to be emphasized, MDM does not do any overlap checking. It is merely storing the data so that you can see where there are overlaps. The reason why there's a calendar is that we want to make sure we have an orderly process into loading into MDM. Otherwise, MDM can process 10 files at the same time, no problem, easy. But we have to have an orderly process because if one model goes, they need sort of that data stability so that no one's trying to insert new alignments into it. And then it will mess up your sort of reconciliation process. So they need that stability to resolve the alignment overlaps and submit it to MDM, and then you're done. And that's the reason why there is a calendar, because you need an orderly process, and that orderly process entails that, and it's kind of a yearly sort of there's a lot of business cycles to this. You will hear often if you work with overlaps, well, I am a prospective assignment model, which is actually most models, meaning that what they'll do for alignments is they in the beginning of the year or prior to the beginning of next year, there's a time frame from like around October to maybe even into January that these prospective alignment models would identify prospectively, not in the final manner, what are the BNI provider alignments that I anticipate. And so they'll send that to MDM, but throughout the year, after that, they'll adjust based on the data they're getting back from the field, and they'll say, oh, this provider and this BNI has never aligned to us, and they will take that out of MDM. And so it is important to recognize that I think the main thing about this business cycle that I'm talking about on a yearly basis, that simply data goes in and out, especially in recent years in MDM. It's a operational, there's a terminology for that. It's a data store. Where you really care about that is if you're a data consumer, if you're just kind of using it for evaluation purposes, you should understand that the data that you receive from MDM, especially in recent years, could go in and out because it's primarily used for overlaps. It's not the final data. You could be in a spot where it's just more of a preliminarily identified alignments. Okay. All right. Now, lastly, the last point is that the whole idea of having a calendar. Again, MDM has no problem loading 10 or 15, 50, 100. Has no problem loading multiple files. But the idea of calendar, over the years we developed, let's try to lower the barriers of this whole process as much as possible. And so the calendar only applies to adding new BNIs and adding new provider relationships. So other types of file, program, organization, ad hoc, there are ad hoc files. If you need to do, if you can do that without being subject to calendar, you can just automatically send to MDM and MDM will process it. Okay? So
What were the other kind of files that you said that you don't have to wait for a window other than ad hoc?
a program, we're going to go into the ICD, which is a good question for the general audience. A program file, the organization file, a program organization file, and ad hoc files. Ad hoc files limit BNIs and providers so that you're not adding ad hoc files, you're not adding any new providers or BNIs. You're only updating the data or end dating or taking them out altogether.
Keeping with this slide that you currently have that you're sharing, the important thing to realize is if I look at this and I see at the end CEC, that would be a file submission. These blocks are showing when files are submitted, and then people find it relevant that it of course says when extracts are going to be available. So really, CEC shows kind of there, although it's in the early part of the next, but if you kind of think of that as the end of the month, you could say, well, CEC would be looking at the other models that are coming before them to say, I have a business rule, CEC, as a payment model for CEC, I have a business rule that says I cannot conflict with, and you could be looking at any other one of the models that's before it, because then you're interested in saying that is on his slide where he talked about the factors that decide the slides. It's what types of overlaps and what types of reconciliations and evaluations occur. So if CEC needs to, the term he used was if you're at the bottom of the totem pole, I mean, that's kind of how it works. If you have to evaluate your rules against a lot of other programs, you want to know when the other ones have finished submitting. So it's not just, gee, is CEC going to be on time with submitting something? It's, did everybody before them get all the data in so that there was the time for the evaluation to occur? That's where it becomes a much more interrelated tangle of information. So graphically, looks nice and clean, but really all of that is what goes into the fact that there are these meetings and the fact that we're talking about it being a collaboration and a communication, because that is where, think about it, 2 months before the beginning of the year, we're trying to draft out and have people start having those conversations saying, there's this, and I think I should be ready to submit something that's some prospective information in January, but I need to know, did you already submit your first take on what you think you might have from these other programs? Because my rules are based upon your other programs. We didn't draw lines on here to show that on the calendar that he's sharing, but that's what the thinking is that goes into that.
Yeah, and I want to point out, because this is more a general audience thing. I'm going to be talking to Nash. As a model lead, this will be a standard orientation. We'll discuss it more further. And because they're distinctive and unique processes with each model, we like to meet with individual models and discuss your unique aspects and how you get your data and how does this calendar kind of fits into your business process. So we'll actually give you more of a targeted, more specific detail that will be much more helpful.
And Louise, yeah. So this is really a visual representation of what the model teams, this information is really coming from the model teams, not those of us that helps to create it. We just track it and make sure it's well communicated. But this is a blessing, and we do this 2-3 months ahead of time, and it's get vetted and vetted until the months that it's supposed to be implemented. So it's already been blessed by everybody, hopefully. And sometimes while in flight, we may have to change some of the windows, and we have to re-engage everybody all over again. So it's a very interactive process.
So the overlap reports, when are they generally generated? Is it like after all the data has been loaded each month at the end, or how does it work?
You can run the overlap support anytime you need it. I think before there was more of an official quarterly overlap report, which doesn't, it's just kind of more on a quarterly basis. There isn't a spot where, hey, it makes sense to run an overlap report. And so overlap report is I'll talk about that a little bit more because it's been more decentralized so that contractors can run their overlap reports anytime you need it. It depends who you are, but if you're an individual model or contractor, you really want to run the overlap reports during your alignment period, all the time, each time. Yeah. Just to make sure you resolve everything. Yeah. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but not give it a short shift here. High-level overlap or typical alignment process, really talk much about this. During the alignment period, what you're really doing is, I need the data stability, MDM data freeze, you're taking the extract file, you're comparing against your list, usually, so some models cannot do that, or not set up to do that. We have options to be able to set up to do that. But basically, what you're trying to do during your alignment period is before you send data to MDM, you're trying to minimize all potential overlaps as much as you can. And then you submit files to MDM. We aim for MDM to fully process the file, and then review the response file, and then resubmit if you have any issues. I want to emphasize, there's a reason why we don't do overlap checking in MDM. Part of it is because strategically, it's just tactically, there are lots of questions about that. But what I want to say is, without misstating this, it's not the end of the world if you send overlaps to MDM. The real important part is that you make sure you identify them, and one, resolve them as soon as possible, or two, resolve it with your opposing whoever you overlap with as soon as possible. It's because I think that a lot of systems want to have more rigidity and discipline, perhaps, to not send overlaps to MDM. But I do want to say that the main important thing is that agreement handshake with one model with another to say, I agree, we'll fix the data, And this is going to be what we understand so that you have these alignments and I have these alignments and we're good to go. So it's much more important to have that model-to-model engagement. Okay? Now, going back to the question, how are overlap hierarchies established? Well, so I talked about how the scheduling is established. Now, how are overlap hierarchies between model to model established? So I think there are 3 ways. One, I'm going to take CEC as an example. CEC, when they first started, they will have a list of models that are currently submitting data to MDM. And ideally, you go through each model and say, you know, SSP has these alignments over me or not. Or NJACO has these alignments over me or not. You just kind of go through the list and you work out those business rules, or if you do not know ahead of time. Second, sometimes there are equal precedences between one model and the other. So what happens there is whoever sent it to MDM first has it. So that's how the hierarchy is established. Simply, you know, and you would think that being in the beginning of the month is ideal, but if you look at it throughout the year, it's kind of cyclical, and that doesn't really necessarily mean a thing. And it's all depends on who's gonna be getting their business data to send to MDM and so forth. And third, a payment model just simply negotiates with another payment model. I've seen this happen before, which a model would say, we don't have any bennies to work with. Can you please be nice to me and give us a pool of bennies? And so they'll say, okay, that's okay. That's only 10,000 out of 10 million, you know? And so it just happens that way. So those hierarchies, I think this has been a common question, a frequent question for in the overlaps process. But the most important thing is that on an individual model-to-model basis, that you have a clear-cut action of what you do in those scenarios for each model. Okay, that helps. All right, now, overlap reports. Now, this is the official overlap report. Although we do say you don't check, every model and model contractor should have mechanisms to check for your own overlaps. That's because you have your own individual system and so forth. Now, the official overlap reports, which I apologize, is a little hard to see for those in the room. What you see here is a lot of the business data. The Benny ID is for Medicare bennies. They are usually Benny link key. And it's comparing one model against another where the alignment effective date and the alignment end date overlaps. So using the top line example, you have CC. I'm running this overlap report as an example from a CC perspective. And I'm looking at my Benny, which is the top one, which is 100001187, and looking at alignment effective date, January 1st, 2018, and at that time, they didn't have a end date, so they defaulted the end date to 12/31/999. Now, you will see that this has an overlap with NGACO, which that Benny ID is the same, and where that overlap was between January 1st, if you're looking at column AF and AG, January 1st, 2018 and January 1st, 2018. So it overlapped by 1 day. So this was flagged as an overlap. And also to read this, you will see that, that CEC had this record before NGACO did, because the record version timestamp in the overlap report states that when that file or when that data to MDM was submitted. So all intents and purposes, I know I look at this record and I know what happened. Basically, NGACO, this was probably kind of a exclusion 1 day alignment. All intents and purposes, this is a CEC alignment over NGACO. And even though it shows up in the overlap report, so long as they agreed to who has the alignment, CEC has the alignment, CAC officially has the alignment.
So then NGACO would drop that Benny for the one-day alignment?
Yeah, officially they don't look at it as alignment, but on a report level, they wanted to keep it in MDM. So when whoever gets the overlap report, the official overlap report here, this is really the place where you want to look for. You want to look for the ID itself, the program that you overlap with, and the dates, and the record version timestamp.
Why the ID, does it flag for overlap if it's not the same exact Benny ID?
It does not flag for overlap. Meaning, it's not the same bennies.
So why would we need to look at the Benny ID?
Oh, well, so that you know who you're going to be talking about with the other program. Yeah, yeah,
So your question may be, why do we list it twice?
yeah.
But, so you can see what the source was from one program and the other.
Right. Yeah, we could hide it, but that's how the overlap. Yep.
So are these reports, so like the model or whatever requesting it, would they always be on the left? And then the right would be all of the
Overlaps, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any question here? Okay. Same deal with provider, just because I have to speed it up. But there are two versions of provider reports. One is just doing overlaps by TIN. The second overlap report is by a combination of TIN and PI. So whenever you have an overlap with the dates overlap, that's when the overlap report was flagged. This overlap report that we're seeing is accessible to anybody to run. I do sometimes run for individual model leads because there's some editing and everything, but this could be something your contractors can have access to and run whenever they want to.
What about CMS
And
employees?
CMS employees.
So
and
like I could go run this right now.
Yep. If you have the job code, which I think I have the job code list here somewhere. Yeah. I think once you start to use it, I'm just going to mention it, there are a lot of opportunities to improve the report because the overlap report gets all past, present, and future overlaps. So, all right, now going into overlaps, admin, we could share with you after this if you're interested, but if you're here and if you're already engaged with overlaps, you should already have the overlap SharePoint portal. I think the main thing I want to point out here is you see this schedule, and this is a form for you to submit CRs. Very important because it's nicely integrated with our processes, not technology integration, but mainly like that's the central place that we can go to now. And that's where we keep track of all the issues that are coming in. Now, now this is kind of hopping into a different subject, but we kind of touched upon it a little bit. Some common, one frequent question that we receive over the years is MDM source system of record or system of reference? For the general audience, what does this mean? Well, source system of record means that if any one of the reference, anyone downstream, like evaluation groups, they see data, it states that Benny was aligned for the start date and end date for this program. The source system record owns that data, meaning wherever that is changed, then that is what is happening, actually happened for that beneficiary. So here's the thing, like that may not be easy to digest, but MDM is very important to recognize that MDM is simply reflecting, consolidating, that's the hard part, but simply reflecting what is source system of record, or you can call it source system of truth, back to the original source systems that send the data to MDM. This is very important to kind of understand this concept because over the years, people will ask, why don't you just change the data in MDM? well, we could change the data in MDM, but we can't as a policy. It will be a big no-no because that will create synchronization issue with I have one version of truth in MDM and I have a different version of truth in the original source system. So very important to kind of respect that process, because in this whole space of ecosystem managing overlaps and so forth, we have to be mindful that even if MDM is just recording data and its job primarily is to consolidate, that if you actually want to know what happened to these alignments, like truthfully, like today, the data didn't change, you go back to the original source system that sent us that data. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, great. So just some quick reference, guys. I think as I'm reading through this, we'll probably just share these slides for everybody. And as a parent business model lead, I try to encapsulate all the key points that you will have to, that helpful guides to understand, smooth out the process. For example, I mentioned to you that as a principal, you should, as a general practice, sorry, you should, before you should have an idea of precedence with each other model that is currently actively sending data to MDM. Also, you want to document resolutions to alignment overlaps, something that we emphasized in the beginning, like 2012, but this is something that over the years, it's been more challenging to document. But I do say that for the sake of mitigation and documentation, you want to just keep track of that as best as you can. Also say attend the overlaps meeting. It's primarily and the best way to kind of get the community, like sort of understand the community of stakeholders and interact with the community of stakeholders. Then I have more items here, which I again stated before. If part of this, the goal of this training is, I want to show my face here to say, hey guys, if you have any issue, if you have any sort of ideas and how when you start to connect the dots of what MDM fully is, I'm talking about the payment model, but if you have other areas of MDM that you want to connect with, hook up with, however you want to leverage, just kind of talk to us, and we'll get somewhere with it. I assure you. Also, other tips, this is something we kind of did more retrospectively, but I'm hoping that we'd be more proactive about making sure that your contractors have good QA practices when sending data to MDM. And by that, part of it, I'm talking selfishly because they see data in MDM and it seems like MDM did something to it, but no, we didn't. We're just kind of reflecting what MDM stored. Now, other points here, not to just kind of read off the slides. I would say, without being a policy person here, but I think it's good. I would nudge all the contractors to have access to MicroStrategy and to be able to run their own overlap reports. And I think I made all these points throughout the presentation. But I do want to say, if you're a model lead or model lead point of contact, please go back to this and maybe I should put check boxes in here, but just please hit all those points if you can, because that will optimize your use of MDM.
Can I ask you to go back one slide? The document the resolutions to alignments that were flagged as overlaps for your model, where does that happen?
That happens individually with each model.
Okay, so they're going back to the model participants and saying, you need to terminate this,
Yes,
or whatever.
that interaction
Okay.
happens.
Thanks.
Now, there's a hesitation in here. I don't want to, I don't want to, that's what we should do. I don't know if we all do it diligently.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if there was a data capture of that activity somewhere, that these were the agreed upon resolutions, or if it just went back to the participants to make necessary corrections.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
That's good. Now, kind of segue into, we're going to part 2, but here's a reference guide for PMR and contractors. I know some of you are going to stick around for part 2. I talked about the QA process in place. Honestly, it's not that MDM will not oversee your QA process, but we could probably work with you to optimize that QA process, because there's a lot of timing with the data, and we have response files and so forth, and so we can optimize that process as best as we can. Now, I'm gonna try to get to the end here because I think I'm running out of time. I'm just gonna share these slides afterwards for everybody, but please, if you're a payment model contractor, come back to it and make sure you hit those points. Finally, some of the contact list, you can go back when we share the slides, you can go back to it, and again, this is kind of a checkbox thing. Just make sure you're kind of, especially depending on the kind of stakeholder you are, just go in there and going in there and make sure you're kind of plugged into all the informational communicative things. And finally, we have MidPuck. This is the user group that we have on a monthly or basis that will talk about various areas of MDM. And this is most helpful. I will recommend everyone to go get in, but especially as you start thinking about, hey, how could sort of the greater MDM be helpful for me as well? So, I want to end this. Any questions?
I do have some follow-ups, but I think that maybe we can just have a quick call. It's probably things that everyone else knows.
Oh, no problem. Anytime.
So one of those couple of slides from the end, your last bullet stated that if there's changes to your schedule, to try and communicate that ahead. Just gonna underscore something here that we didn't really touch on when we showed what that schedule is. For those, we talked about how you could submit other files that are like ad hocs and some of the program and organization ones, but when we're talking about the files that you have to have scheduled, we codified having parameters that pick up that schedule, so you will reject if you submit a file. We didn't say that part. We didn't give you that part, but that's the reason why you not only because you need to be able to communicate so somebody else who's trying to evaluate your data knows, is their data going to be delayed? It's also because that schedule has to reflect what's going to happen. Otherwise, you will submit a file, and if it's one that has to be scheduled, so it's not an ad hoc or something where you're trying to add something, it has to be on the schedule so we can update some of the control cards and things so that you basically won't get a reject. Otherwise, you will get a reject. So if you submit something out of the window, that's one of the files that has to be scheduled. You have to know that, because otherwise you're impacting other people. It's not really about the impact you have about trying to make your schedule for somebody in the file. It's that other people need to know that something's locked down. It's not MDM data per se that it has to be locked down. It's that somebody needs to know, am I going to be evaluating against data that is the right and up to date, and as up to date as it's going to be before I submit my data. So just wanted to point that one out.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul. Thank you, everyone. Please go ahead and send us questions. I mean, we're going into part 2, which is more data centric, and we're going to take a 10-minute break. And that's it. So thank you again, and we'll reconvene at 10:45.
2:45.
2:45. I'm sorry, 2:45. Hey.
10:45 on the West Coast.
Yeah.
3 hours I don't want to relive.
Yes. How are you?
Oh,
Good, yeah.
Thanks. super
Never
dull,
ends.
is it? Yeah,
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of our MDM Quarterly Training Event, the MDM Alignment Process training. For folks who are on the line, can you all please mute your phones? And feel free to unmute your phones as you have a question or any comments you would like to add during today's training. I'm going to turn this over now to Nagesh and Luis. Thank you.
So we still have,
I'm sorry, there's somebody on the line who we can hear typing. Please put your phones on mute if you are not going to be asking any questions.
Just give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Yes, Sandra.
Just called it.
Hello? Yeah?
VJ.
We hear you, VJ.
Oh,
So, these guys. Is it only
all right.
that?
Yeah.
Oh, I think I need the cable there.
Yeah, you do.
You heard him say, hey, Chandra. Oh. Beep, beep.
All right, can you guys hear me from the room?
Yes, we can hear you on the line as well.
Sure. If you're not talking, can you go please on mute? I still hear some keyboard banging. Lost it. Okay, there you go. Okay, so welcome back again. Hope you had a good break. So while the first part of the training, we were covering more on the business aspect of it, what MDM is, what it means to business community, and how we support CMMI in their overlap functions, and then helping them in day-to-day operations. So this part of this section is going to cover more the technical aspects of it. So what we wanted to do is we'll pull up the POR ICD, go over the ICD, how we won't deep dive into each line, but at least talk over the sections that are involved. If you are looking for certain information, then which section you need to hit, and if you have any questions, whom to reach.
Are you sharing your screen?
I am. Okay. Once again, I think I'm not showing my screen yet.
There you go.
Good? All right. Oh, it's coming like this then. Right. Right, perfect. And then also what we wanted to do is we wanted to pull up MicroStrategy and navigate through that and show you how to execute report. Because our data has PII, PHI, we won't be able to show the data, but we can show you up until the point where you can select the criteria and hit execute. And then we can pull up some Excel spreadsheets that we have to showcase the data. And then also the POR data is made available in other environments like IDR and CCW. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and then we'll open up the board for questions. Before we go deep dive, I wanted to go back to the 2 slides which we skimmed upon. We didn't get into much detail. So MDM has 3 domains. What we have is provider, beneficiary, and POR. And so we have data products in all these different domains. So to start with the source, from the source point, so provider has data from PAYCOs to get the provider's Medicare enrollment data. And then we have data from NPES, which is enumeration data all providers who participate in US register in that to get NPI, and we get in all that data. And then we have NPICS crosswalk data, which is now stale because NPICS has been decommissioned. But the last load was, I believe, June of last year, and we have that. We also receive data from Keys about hospital certification, facility certifications. And as I said before, we are currently working on TMSs, which is getting the Medicaid providers into MDM. As we speak, the Medicaid individuals is already integrated, and we are loading the data. And eventually, all our products is going to be enriched with. Once we are done with our processing of data, then all our products should have Medicaid providers as well in it. So the first line here, the first section, the data extracts, it shows about that. So our data mart on the provider side is PMI SPP. There are a set of tables. PMI would have a confirmed data from multiple sources, and SPP is specific to one source alone, and it's not confirmed data. So that would be like getting a PAYCO's reassignment of benefits or role associations data. So we produce extracts of PMI SPP. So if you want to, if you're only interested in certain data aspects of it, we can choose the extracts that you're interested in and consume on your end and do your analysis on your side. And on the POR side, we have the Benny extract and provider extract, and we'll go deep dive into it when we walk through the ICD. In future, we're going to add organizational Medicaid providers, that's groups and facilities as well. Beneficiary side, so beneficiary, we currently have data populated in MDM data mart, and which runs through InfoSphere as well for ID resolution. And again, the volume of Bennies is huge, coming in from CME in millions. So there, what we were more thinking is to kind of develop a customized extracts focused on answering certain questions that your business group may have. So if you have certain need for CME data, then definitely reach out to us. And again, in the MDM roadmap, what we're going to do is we'll be adding in the TMSys recipients as well. So once we are done with TMSys provider, then our next step in our roadmap is to integrate Medicaid recipients into MDM. Moving on to data analytics, so there are two ways you can do some analysis with the data. One is directly tapping into our tables on DB2 sites, which any data stewards can request for it. So we have on DB2, and also what we do is the provider data, the PMI SPP tables, we make a copy of that into IDR analytical data mart. And again, the structure of the tables is going to be identical to what we have on the DB2 side, but then you get to use the reporting tools or analytical tools that are on the IDR side with the same data set. Beneficiary, you can access the DB2 tables. Likewise, POR, it's on both DB2 and on the POR IDR base. So we do have it in the ADM as well at this point, which is going to mimic the structure of what we have in DB2 side. But eventually we may turn that off because the IDR base has ingested the POR data from MDM as well. Okay. Then moving on to data services, we have both SOAP-based and RESTful APIs. So on the POR side, we have active models, and actually ACOOS, they use our services for a verification and validation of providers and beneficiaries. And again, all other model teams can extend and use that. Likewise, on the provider side, we have some SOAP-based web services and RESTful APIs that would use both data from PAYCOs and also NPES. We have ICDs which gets into more details about this data services. And if you are interested in knowing more about it, please shoot email to me, Nagesh Puli, or Jill Katz, and we will get that information to you. Also, time in time out in our mid-PUG sessions, we do conduct topics to go more in detail. If you are interested in knowing more about any of these products, or you want to understand the underlying processing of data and how you can join data across these multiple domains, then again, please feel free to reach out to Jill Katz, and she'll coordinate with us. Any questions before I go to the next slide in terms of products that we offer? Okay. So yeah, we have data from different domains and what it means to the advanced payment model team. The first thing I would like to highlight is the data expertise. Provider data is very complex in terms of understanding the grain of data when multiple systems are involved. Paycos has a way of capturing a provider data, likewise NPES has a way of capturing it, and bringing that all into one bucket for users to use simple queries is quite challenging. And over the years, we have digged into a deeper analysis, and I can say that we have that expertise. And if you have any questions or any problem that you're trying to solve with provider and beneficiary data, then please feel free to reach out to us, and we can definitely help you guys in that area. At the same time, MDM Data Mart has data from various sources, which are termed as system of records. And what it enables the advanced payment model teams is to join the POR data that we have to these data sets across in provider and beneficiary domain as well. Like I said, we have already integrated individual providers, and eventually the organizational providers and the Medicaid recipients is also going to be in, and that will enable the model teams to even not only do post model, but also maybe if you want to design a model in a specific what do you call the diagnosis or a specific area, then you can use this data to analyze that, like where there is more concentration of many like dual eligible beneficiaries, and then design your models as well. And also, last but not least, you can leverage IDR environment with its suite of tools on the analytical end to use to run queries against the MDM data there. And also IDR has other rich data sets like claims, and if there is a need for you guys to link the data, then that's something that's enabled at this point. So I wanted to discuss about this slide in the end, but then I'm afraid people might leave early, so I just want to cover that now itself. So I think that the more exciting things happening at CMS is marching towards the cloud environments, right? And we are currently evaluating on our end as well to move to a cloud environment, and also look at new platforms and technologies to add more bells and whistles to the MDM system. As you all know, it's MDM is a shared system, and we are here to cater multiple business groups and multiple downstream systems. And our goal is to get to a point, change our landscape and architecture to a point where we can quickly deliver any products that any consumer comes in with any particular question or data need, then we want to have quick time to market. At the same time, we want to be scalable and also add more analytical capabilities to our setup. More to follow. We are currently we have started some series of micro pilots. We are already looking at certain tools and technologies, and also alternate environments, and more to follow. So in our mid-part sessions, we're going to share our progress and what to expect. All right, so now to the subject of the meeting. So what I'm going to do is pull up the ICD. Okay, so why is it not? So this is our POR ICD, and we are currently on version 4.2. At a point, there were two types of interfaces we had, and that's why that was termed as version 5. So what you'll be seeing is anytime we make an update to this document, please go by the version number which is down. So currently we are on version 9. We are working on version 10, which will be released pretty soon. So this ICD, again, it covers all the file types that we deal with, inbound and outbound, and extracts that we generate. And it captures the details of the file layout, what attributes are required, mandatory, and if there are any errors and warnings that we provide, we send it back via response file. Before we dig into the ICD, I'll just take a moment to touch base about the interface, how things work on the MDM side. So as Luis explained, looking at the overlap schedule, we have some certain control steps on our interface end. So there are 5 file types that the model teams send. Okay, it's not sharing again.
Yeah, sorry. Just up there.
Well,
I don't know
because
whether online can see, but in the room we can't.
But yeah, so because they switched to, I think, this YouTube link. Sorry, we have some technical difficulties here in the room. I'll be right back. Oops, they're gone. Oh, they're here. Yeah.
You had one just fine.
Yeah, does it depend on the application?
No.
Actually, it's showing up on the WebEx, but
Yeah, it's showing on WebEx, but keep it on the screen.
Yes, we currently see on the WebEx the POR. We're seeing section 4, assumptions, constraints, and risks.
yeah, Jill, in the room, it's not showing up on the projector screen. So I have a tech person who's looking at it.
Okay.
Let's see if that one comes. But they are seeing on WebEx though, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So once the model team sends the file through EFT or through internet server, so our jobs kick off. We pick the file, and then if it fits within the schedule that was pre-agreed and we have it in our database tables, then we process the file. If it comes anything outside the schedule and you're a model which sends incremental file and suddenly you start sending a full replacement file, then we reject that and we send back a notification. So once everything is good, then we do a high-level file-level checks. So the file itself gets sanitized, looking at the file header, trailer record. Do we have all the records that the count of records that the trailer says? Do we have it or not? And once the file level checks is done, then we start playing with the records themselves. So we have a suite of tools. We use SyncSort, we use Informatica and Python scripts to process the data. And the data itself moves in certain stages. So we have staging area, wherein we make sure by that time we already process the records, make sure there are no record level errors. And once everything is good, the records which are accepted and which do not have any errors, then they get loaded into the data mart tables. And once the data gets into the data mart tables, then by the end of the day, depending on all the files that we receive during the day, beneficiary and provider files, we generate the extract files end of the day. At the same time, what we do is we update what we call is a set of base clone tables in the DB2 side, which are used and leveraged by MicroStrategy to support overlap reports and also Recently, we developed a POR Berry demographic report, and even that leverages the base clone tables that we have developed. And so what it enables is if we are actually processing data and we are loading data, then that does not disrupt any reports that you run in MicroStrategy. You will not get any errors, and you will be able to fetch the data without any issues. Okay. I don't want to go a deep dive into all the assumptions, but please pay attention to assumptions. It has a lot of tricky things that you want to read at. Actually, let's do one thing. We'll come back to the slides. Okay, so we have 5 types of files, program, and again that. So what you're seeing on the screen is the main business keys that we have. And the program is obviously program ID. And then on the org side, program ID and organization that is participating in the program, which could be an ACO, ESCO, things like that. And program and organization is relationship between the program and org, like the name says, sorry. So you have a program ID, org ID, and program affiliation start date. And going to the organization and provider relationship, you have program ID and org ID, a TIN, a tax identification number of the organization, and then you have NPIs of providers. So what you can look at it as an organization by itself and its NPI, or in the case of individual providers who are doing reassignment of benefits, then their NPI is going to be listed as well. And then you have other types of identifiers like CCN, and then the payment track ID. So models like NextGen ACO and CEC have tracks. So that's again based on the amount of risk a provider is willing to take to get more benefits. The more benefits, the higher the risk. So tracks define that. And also the affiliation start date and end date, but affiliation start date is part of the key. Going to org Benny, so you have program ID, org ID, your Benny link key, and again your track code and Benny alignment start date. It's important to understand these keys is because how you send data is all revolving around it. So when you send a full replacement file, it's straightforward, the records get loaded. But when you send an incremental file or an ad hoc file, you have to make sure the data that you're sending with these keys reflect what we already have in MDM. If it is an add, it's fine, but if it's an update or a drop, update or delete, you have to make sure the keys match what's in MDM, and only when the business keys match, then we perform the necessary operation that you're trying to do.
And if it's not, we'll reject with the meaningful reject response code that says that you submitted, like you're missing one of the business keys that you want to update. So the response code will let you guys know what's the reason for the rejection.
Okay, so coming back to ICD. So we covered, so table 1 shows the keys again, and what you have to remember is certain columns, you're not supposed to send a value of -1 in certain fields. The reason is we use that as a default value if we do not get anything. So you have to make sure you do not do that and make sure you follow this table. And the file type is pipe delimited. Table 2 gives general processing rules. You can look at it as various business scenarios. So in terms of when you send an incremental file with a record, which is add, update, or delete, and at the same time, if you send a full replacement file, the record type should be R. And there are various things that occur, and all these business scenarios revolve around whether or not that record is already there in MDM, and and then depending on the file type and the record status, and as a particular operation occurs. So it's key to understand this table. And again, I'm not going to go deep dive into all of this, but if you're a model team and you still have any questions around this table, you do not quite understand, maybe in a particular business scenario that you have, you do not know which particular file type to send with the record status, then please reach out to us and we can have that one-on-one session with me and Louis, and then we can clearly explain that to you. Anything you want to add here, Louis?
No, I think you covered it. Yeah.
All right, so the file has both header and trailer record, and we have counts of it. So when we get a file and we process it and we send back a response file, which would have either the errors or warnings that you need to take care of when you send that file next time. It will also include a count of how many records we have accepted, how many we have rejected, and how many we're sending as warnings. So in order to understand those counts, we laid down certain scenarios here and some examples, which you can look at. And this is a high-level walkthrough of the data flow, and we started this meeting saying that.
There, good. I think as I mentioned, just as a reminder, as a policy, we talked about QA. I do recommend that you bake into the process to make sure you check those response codes. Some are just, like Nagesh was mentioning, warnings. Some are actually rejections, but we've had instances in the past where some of the issues would have been resolved if we check the response code. So I do want to make sure that everyone bakes that into the process.
Okay, so the monthly overlap schedule, we've touched upon it, and again, like I said, our system will reject the file if you send the file which is not as per the calendar. Okay, I guess this is important. So data retention. So once you send the file by EFT, we retain that on the mainframe for 30 days, and after which it is archived. Any outbound file is going to be stored for 90 days. So all the response file and extract files are there for 90 days if you want to get back and look at it. Table 6 gives you the IDs, program IDs for all the models, and also list what type of files they send, full or incremental.
Yes, I want to add, like Nagesh, as you're hitting this, and we have a lot of the IDs defined that we predefined that it's not submitting. There was an intent to submit data to MDM, but they didn't end up submitting, so you find those IDs here. This is sometimes because the documentation is not as frequently updated. So you can always reach out to Nagesh to know all the most recent list of IDs that were updated. So I think this is a table that often a lot of people will use. Just want to say, the documentation doesn't always get updated as quickly as you would if you reach out to us. Yeah.
Okay, table 7 shows you the error code, the response code that we send when we do a file level reject. So like I said early in the interface, we do a file level checks, and only once it gets to that is when we dig into the records and process the records. So these are the code sets with respect to file level rejects. So program file, yeah, you don't have to send this file more often. This is something that you would need to send initially to set up the program in the MDM. But the key thing to remember is the email IDs. So all notifications that are sent out are based on the email IDs that are provided here. It's huge. It's 1,000 character long. So we recommend all model teams to make sure you update the email IDs frequently. If you don't, then you will miss all the notifications that come out. And again, we advise you to create a group email ID. That way, if resources come in and go out, then you don't have to send an updated file all the time. Having a group will make it easy. So how the ICD is layout is, you will see the layout of the file, and then what you'll see is the response file layout, which will be identical to the inbound file. The only thing that adds to it is the response code in the end. And also there are some count fields that we went over earlier. They will be added to the trailer record. Apart from that, there won't be any difference. And then it highlights the naming convention. So it always starts with model ID, program ID, and then the file type, and then followed by date and timestamp. Okay, then let's go to organization file. Again, the header is same, and you can, there are different org type codes, like we discussed before, ACO, ECO, and if your model, so this is across the whole ICD, right? So if you are a new program onboarding to MDM, and for whatever reason, if we did not cover a certain code that we have in place, then we should be able to always add it with a CR. If you don't need it, onboarding a model to MDM is very easy. But if you have some customization in terms of adding a new code or new column, then that's a CR that's put in place, and then a broader discussion happens across the overlaps group on its impacts to other model teams, and then it gets into the MDM pipeline, and then depending on how many other CRs we have, then that gets addressed.
Yeah, Nagesh, thanks for pointing this out, because this is where, the question of, hey, what kind of organization do you capture? It's really listed in here. And like Nagesh was saying, it's not like we just kind of add, we could add, we don't have many filters across this, but it's just, he's pointing out that there goes a business process of making sure the definition of this is distinct and important to list out as a unique organization type code. But for me, I think it's just easier for me to, answering the question, what types of organization do you capture in MDM? And I almost kind of point out to these type codes.
And while you walk through the ICD, make sure you pay attention to the far right column where it says each field, whether it's required or optional. And if you're a model team, you do not have certain value for a field, and we said it required, then that can be a discussion we can have during the onboard on what kind of values you could use as a default for it.
Nagesh, is it fair to say, I think he's been talking about this internally, so every time we have a new model on board, it's fair to say we go through a discussion of how you map it into the ICD.
Right.
And I will say we haven't had the benefit of doing this with some of the older contractors. And so if you need a re-review of how you map the data into MDM, there's a lot more impact and consequence in that. But however, if you need specific review, because each model has their own distinctive business data, and if you want to talk to us about that, please do, because we want to be sure that you're mapping it correctly.
And then, we collect set of identifiers for organization, TINs, NPIs, other identifiers. address of where they practice, their billing address.
So can I ask a few questions?
Sure.
When it says optional, how do you know what when it's required? I mean, this page seems to tell you, but the prior page didn't seem to.
It does. So,
Okay. See those optional words?
Your question is how do you know if it's required?
No, when it's optional, then you can give it or not give it, whether you want to or not. When it says optional, only required if, then it's required based on that condition. Otherwise, it's purely optional.
right,
Okay,
right. So this is a tricky one where let's say an ACO has a parent entity. So if you want to capture that relationship, then at that point, it's required.
Thanks.
Yeah, part of the reason is that certain fields, they're optional, but certain fields don't really have meaning unless if you send us additional information.
Okay. Then comes the program and organization relationship file. And again, this is a file that you may not send updates to it quite frequently, depending on the model. So once if you have a group of ACOs, then you establish it. But let's say if the whole ACO drops, then you send this file to say that, hey, this organization is no longer participating in this model by doing an end date on the affiliation of it. Anything catchy on the PO side?
I think you covered it all. Yeah. I think you covered it all because it's kind of the structure of this is to tell us the relationship between when that org affiliated with the program, right?
If the org itself is out of business and they're no longer there in the healthcare world, then you would terminate that org using the org file. But this file is only whether or not an org is participating in a program. Next is OV file organization provider. So again, it gets down into details of all the providers within the org participating in the model. This one has a lot more fields than other files. And again, as long as you follow the business keys, performing an operation of add, update, delete would not be an issue. Please pay attention to the required and optional fields here.
And as Nikesh is scrolling, this is where I think the earlier slide on some of the key data will be more helpful for the program needs. I do want to point out that I didn't point out that Nikesh is sort of scrolling through. There's a lot more opportunity to add in and fill in the richness of the data that's sent into MDM. But if that is not available, that's why MDM has other sources of data that you can utilize to fill in a lot of these other optional fields. If I may, hopefully you're thinking along those lines. For example, particularly for provider and bennies, if I don't have all the demographic information for provider or benny, when I send this data to MDM, there are other areas or especially provider, there's other areas of provider data that you can reference to fill in that data.
Moving on to the next file tab, org beneficiary. And again, very key thing here is to make sure we emphasize on Benny link key. We need that to effectively perform an overlap operation for beneficiaries. So for that, we request all model teams to send the BLK if they have it. If they do not, then what they can do is they can send us MVI, or they can send us HICIN along with their demographic data like last name, first name, date of birth, and gender. So what we do is we take this data and then we do a lookup on the CME data set that we have to find and trace the Benny key, and then we enrich the data mart and also send the Benny key in the response file. So one CR that we have in place at this point is, so MBI to BLK relationship is 1-to-1. So if you send MBI today, then you do not have to send the demographic data for us to do a BLK lookup. But if you have the demographic data, please do send it to us. And again, that's to ensure that you have a good quality, and it also enables us in future to do a comparison of pure data with the system of record data as well, to see that the model teams have more updated information, and that creates an opportunity to correct on your end as well.
Would that possibly be an opportunity to flag a warning and that data that they submitted for a beneficiary doesn't match the official record?
We do that. We actually reject that record.
You reject it?
Yeah, if we do not find any, let's say that whole thing is not there in CME, then we reject that.
Okay, but if I send you a date of birth of, 1/3, and in the system of record, it is 3/1, you would reject it as well, or would you send a warning in that case?
So
No, we reject, what you're saying is you send a date of birth of 0103, and then for that beneficiary in the system of record, it's 3/1, then we reject, saying that we didn't find the Benny in the system.
Okay, even though I gave you the correct Benny link key.
No, if you give the Benny link key, then we don't even go there to validate that. So.
Okay, so no warning in
No
that
warning
case.
in that
Okay,
case.
thank you.
Yeah, can I tag on? This is really important because they might suggest that, hey, we're system of record, but this is, we're referencing CME to identify the Benny link key. If you don't know the Benny link key, but you're sending us Hicken, first name, last name, date of birth, and gender. By the way, if you send the Hicken and first name, last name, date of birth, gender, there's a sort of a standard sort of matching logic that CMS uses to look up the Benny link key. So that's what we use. It's like you have to get 3 out of 4 of that, and then the first 3, there's a standard. But it's
3 out of 5 plus 4 characters.
Yes, yeah, whatever. I just was curious, if that might be the reason for your warnings. Nope, okay.
okay, and section 6.6 covers the so the layout that you saw for the file types that we discussed, you can either send a full replacement file. What it means is each detailed record needs to start with an abbreviation of R. And then you can send an incremental file with either add, update, or D. Excuse me. Then you have ad hoc drop file, which again has a different file naming convention. And then you can either send a U or D record with it. And the purpose of ad hoc drop is it's not to deal with huge volume of data, but then again, if you want to end date any beneficiary or provider, then you can quickly use this file. And also if you want to drop any alignment records, then you can use this file. I want to make a point that the way the system is developed, if you send a record with non-business keys, updates to any non-business keys, then the system allows for it. But again, from practice standpoint, we want you guys to limit the ad hoc drop file only for updating the end dates and then drops of Bennies and providers.
Yeah, as Nagesh goes through this, I realized I missed this detail. I just want to say every contractor should be able to have the ability to send full replacements and incremental. Some from they were already onboarded long time ago may not have the ability. And the reason partly is because if you can do both full and incremental, a full replacement file gives you the opportunity to completely refresh the data with MDM when necessary. In the incremental file, if you're able to send the incremental file, you could also fully utilize the ad hoc file option, which gives it more flexibility working with the alignment calendars. So yeah.
Okay, the next thing is provider and beneficiary extract files. So here what we do is, so looking at the schedule, we may get one or multiple program files. Sorry, by program what I mean is like, let's say OB and OV file from multiple programs, we receive it and we process it, right? End of the day, we generate this extracts, what we call as organization to beneficiary relationships, and at the same time, organization to provider relationship files. So it will have data from all the model teams with active records in it. And the downstream systems can consume this file and then perform any analytics or any overlaps operation on their end. This is one way the model teams used to do it, and we encourage model teams to use more of MicroStrategy reports as well to perform the overlap operations. And then we have the file layout for both OB and OV. It's going to be similar to what you see in the OB and OV file.
So seems like somebody needs to mute.
All right, and then jumping into Appendix G, that's really important. This is where we have all the response codes. And what you need to pay attention is there are, can you please go on mute if you are not talking? If you are using your laptop, again, please pay attention to mute. Thank you. So there are, so we reject records for certain checks that we do. It could be like, let's say, an very important field like effective start date, right? If we don't have that, then we cannot trace the record in MDM to apply any add, update, delete operation. So we reject those records with a particular response code. So for example, BE09. And then we have what we call warnings. We do not reject that record. We take it in, we load it, but then we give this warning to model teams to fix it on the next node that they do. So this appendix covers all the codes that we have, and again, they are very detailed. The goal of it is to maintain the data quality that MDM receives, and which again, because it plays a huge role in terms of overlap, so having this certain attributes which are mandatory to be as per the format and make sure that it's populated. So we enforce all these edits. If your team has a specific need, if you rely on an attribute which we do not make it mandatory or required, and if your model team needs that, then again, please have a dialogue with us, and then we can work on a CR for it. Or if you want to add a new type of check, then again, same thing applies. And here is the email template. So if you have provided email IDs in the P file, then you get emails on various events, and the details of it are in this document, which is embedded within the ICD. So that's ICD at high level. Any questions? I think we can take a couple of minutes here to address any questions that anybody has with respect to the file layouts, processing, error codes, and scenarios. Oh.
I don't know if you want to show this.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. So I'll take that as no. If you are talking, you were on mute if you were asking question. Okay. All right, so next thing is MicroStrategy. So on MicroStrategy end, we have overlap reports. So one thing I want to point out is the MDM contractor as next phase in PSS. We did not develop the overlap reports, but what we did is we provide the base clone tables, the backend tables with data, and then we also took those attributes as what we call as a schema objects in MicroStrategy. And then these reports are developed by contractors via ETL, working with CMMI, and again, Luis and Felicia were heavily involved in developing those reports. So we will walk you through those reports. We will pull up MicroStrategy and show you how it works. And again, I want to point that those schema objects will also enable users to develop any ad hoc reports. So if you want to create your own report, then you can. And also, if you need certain data set, let's say, which are not there in MicroStrategy as schema objects at this point, you want to add certain columns, or you want data from let's say, Paycos, or you want data from NPS or CME, then please raise a CR and we'll work with you guys. And then what we did is we developed a report called PR Beneficiary Demographic Report. That's an evolution of, there was a specific need from Dual's model team to understand beneficiaries' dual eligibility within a certain state and zip code. Then what we thought is it's a good use case for model teams to understand the beneficiary's dual eligibility, whether he can participate in, is he participating in both Medicare and Medicaid, and this, at the same time get the demographic information, his address, first names, last names, and things like that. So we developed a report, and this is the start of it. And again, it's a showcasing that if you have any particular business need, any questions that you're trying to solve, then we can create a report and work with you and create that report. Okay, so I'm gonna transfer it to Luis to log into MicroStrategy, as I'm having some VPN issues that I'm working with. It's already there.
So I kind of skipped one step, which is the login screen. I just want to make sure I didn't forget my password. But this is how you, once you get the portal link, you see what all the applications you have for the portal. And it's as easy as once you have the job codes accepted and processed, you can just go to business intelligence and MicroStrategy reports and start going into the MicroStrategy environment. Now, there are some folders in here, and the one that you want to go to is MDM2 BI prod. Oh, no. Yeah, okay. Sometimes and you get into this portal environment for MDM2 BI prod. Should I just? And you go to the share reports, and you have all your overlap reports. The ones that we use is the beneficiary overlap, the provider TIN overlap, and the provider MPI TIN overlap. So these are officially the quote-unquote official overlap reports. Now, due to PII considerations, I could just kind of go in there. I showed you a sample of it, so in the other slide, but basically you can pick your program that you want to look at what overlap report, and let's pick IH, and you can pick several. But the problem, just keeping in mind MicroStrategy, there are limitations in roles. And so all it is just pick a program and then run a report, and that's it. And you'll get it. And this is going to take a long time, so I'm not going to go through it. There's PII data as well. Now I'm going to go back. And that's really it. And then you get your overlap report. There's some additional editing that you do because there's some filtering that you don't necessarily, even if you run an overlap report, like let's say, for example, from an IH perspective, you don't necessarily have overlap considerations for all the other models. So what you do is once you get the report, you filter down further to other models such as SSP or NGACO and so forth. And that's basically it. Very simple. And if you've worked with this closely, you will see there will be a lot of opportunities to improve the overlap report. And I'll probably breach the subject with Felicia in the near future about that. The second thing is that Nagesh was talking about is the POR beneficiary demographic report. If I may echo, maybe in a louder voice than Nagesh, this is demonstrating a use case of using the payment model data with other parts of MDM data. And this is just one use case, one tiny use case. What this is doing, I'm hoping that it's going to run okay for this meeting time. What this is doing is it's taking any of the payment model data, and you notice like we get most of the data that we get for beneficiary relationship is very skinny down to the Benny ID or the BLK with the start and end date. And what the opportunity here is this links the Benny link key to the demographic information that we have to fill in first name, last name, Hickens, the state, the address, and so forth. The particular use case we have for it here, the reason why we built this in the first place was because the duals model identified a need to pre-identify or pull up a data of all the payment models that are all the beneficiaries that are participating in other payment models. And they wanted to get that data ahead of time and then send it over to the state so that the state can know the list ahead of time. Okay, so I'm not going to dig in too deep in here. Part of the challenge with working with MDM is not necessarily, can you do the query, but more, can you do the query so that it fits the available infrastructure? So, for example, MicroStrategy has a limit in rows, and the challenge for Nagesh's team was just to be able to filter down the reports so that it doesn't pull millions of records into the single report, which you have a limit, a ceiling anyway. So it's just part of that design consideration and working that out that is a limiting factor. I think I could just do North Dakota here, and I can pull up SSP and relationship end year, and you could do multiple things. And we're not gonna look at the report here, but in detail, but it gives you the option to load up specific counties. This is primarily done so that we can filter down even more if necessary. And I don't know if I want to wait for it, and that's it. And you get a front page of summary, the detail records, and all the filters that you applied. Yep. That's it.
And we gave a walkthrough of this report during our overlaps meeting that we had last month. But if you have missed that, again, please feel free to reach out to Jill Katz or myself or Louise, and then we can schedule a one-on-one session with your group to present.
Oh, here, come up. Summary. And this is just a summary of record counts that we found based on the filters that you applied. And the detail, I'm not going to click on that because there are PII values, or PII data elements.
Yeah. So the reason we, again, developed the summary page is to circumnavigate the infrastructure constraints that we have within CMS. You can only page about 2.5 million records in MicroStrategy and about 1.04 million in Excel spreadsheets when you try to export and open it. So what you can do is looking at this counts, if it kind of exceeds that, then maybe you can go back, change your selection criteria to select specific counties to limit that data volume. Yeah, that's about it. But once you click detailed reports, then you will see all the demographic data.
So it's possible to do a provider variation of this report. It's possible to do a provider variation with a Medicare, Medicaid variation parameters. It's possible for all those things. I think part of the challenge is just to set it up. It really takes some time because right now MDM is at a place where they did quite a bit of front work design to be able to harmonize and put that consolidate into one system. So now the challenge these days is how do we present this and how does it gain customer traction to be able to fully utilize the data systems with MDM that's underneath there.
Okay, any questions before we go out of MicroStrategy? All right, so I'll take back the presentation. Oh no, you were presenting it. No, wait.
Yeah, you got it. You can just share your screen now.
Cool. All right. So the next thing is the MDM Web Services. I know I touched upon it beginning of the presentation, but these three services are specific to POR, the ACO-OS model team, ACO-OS system for NG-ACO model, and they use this, and SSP also model. They use this web services to perform their check on beneficiary and provider. And then the get role verification is used by, I want to say EIDM for role authentication. Apart from this, we have web services and RESTful APIs powered from the provider domain. And as you know, we have beneficiary CME data as well. And if you have any specific business need, any questions that you need to answer, then please reach out to us. Maybe our existing services and APIs could answer that. If not, then we can work on a CR to develop something for your particular business group. The next one is getting the accessing POR data in IDR. So like I said before, we make copy of POR data in MDM DB2 in the IDR ADM. Now the structure will mimic what we have in MDB2 side in IDR ADM. But this is something else. So this is IDR team themselves. They have consumed this program organization relationship data into the IDR base tables, and the reason is that having the data sets there will provide opportunity for business groups to link other data sets that are available in IDR. It could be claims or they also perform some assistance in alignment assignment function. Then having this final data as well will help them in doing that linkage. So when you go into IDR base, there are again four main tables. So what they did is they combined the organization and program organization into one table. And then you have program, and then you have organization provider and organization bene. Then they have set of reference tables. So the data is refreshed once every week. At this point, it's Sunday, and then it's made available to consumers. There are a bunch of things that you may want to understand before you start hitting IDR-based tables and run queries, some got-you situations, and some best practices so that are listed out in this PowerPoint deck. We want to really try to end this meeting at 4 and also give opportunity for you guys to ask any questions. So I'm gonna skip through this slide, but again, if you guys want to understand more about this, then please reach out to us, and maybe we can also arrange for a meeting with IDR team to walk them through more in detail.
But these slides will be made available as well?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So again, related to access, so the MicroStrategy reports are through CMS Enterprise portal. You log in, you create your get authenticated through Enterprise portal, but then you will need job codes, and we can't share the job codes right now, but shoot us an email and we share that with you guys. Likewise, you can access pivot data in IDR ADM and also the IDR base tables. If you are a data steward and data expert or a data scientist and you want to play around with data directly in MDM DB2, then also that's a possibility that you guys can explore on. SharePoint website is owned by CMMI. That's a separate email that you need to send for access to the SharePoint website, where you'll get to access the calendar, alignment calendar, and also the CRs that are CR change request over there. One more thing before I open it up for question and answers is MDM is looking at moving to ServiceNow. That's a CMS instance. So what we want to do is we want to go use that for any change request, any onboarding request, and also for any incident management and any support. So if you have any questions about any of the products, then you can go and open a ticket in ServiceNow, and we'll be able to address that. So we're doing that to bring together all teams, use one tool. Sometimes things get lost and buried in emails when you use Outlooks or Gmails. Where a lot it gets buried and you may get attention very late. But once we move to ServiceNow, then it should be more streamlined and you will get response in a timely fashion.
So you're going to have a page where you will go
That's
and
right.
everything is there?
Yeah. We'll have a page. So we are in initial phases. It may take a couple of months to get there, but we'll update the user community via mid-month meetings, and also we'll have a rollout strategy before we start using ServiceNow. We'll plan for some sessions on how to open an incident or a change request using ServiceNow. Any questions? If you're talking, you're on mute. We didn't hear anything so far.
Thank you, actually, for it's and the Gesh popped up sitting through some of the technical details. I think a takeaway that I have, I'm sure a lot of users are wondering. We'll share the slides because there's a lot of checklist-oriented things that we put in here. And there are other aspects of MDM that Nagesh just kind of passed a note in me that wrote right next to me. And there is we omitted talking about the non-claims-based payment because it's not necessarily an MDM thing, but sometime down the line, once we develop this more on Nagesh, I'm sure there's going to be more discussion on the non-claims-based payment because we are making it more available, not within the MDM system, but from a sort of there's non-claims-based repository that we're just going to capture the data for CMMI so that it didn't make sense for us to kind of have two completely separate systems, but we're just taking the opportunity, well, if we're going to store it in the same MDM area anyway, folks submitting their non-claims-based payment can also use MDM at the same time. So we're kind of developing that, not we, but Nagesh's team. And and I think, I think hard to try to capture all the attention for 3 hours. But after looking at this, there's a lot of very checklist oriented. And what I want to encourage is folks to go back to the slides and just make sure that they're hitting all their points as far as baking it into the process, because that's a lot of lessons were learned and we document it in here.
And also, if you have any suggestions about this training, we may do this on a recurring basis. We already know that there are a few model teams who could not make it. We promise to have a one-on-one session with them. Likewise, if your team has missed it and you see this as value add to your team, then please reach out and we can schedule the next one pretty soon. Thank you. Jill, any closing comments?
Hi, folks. Yes, I want to thank everyone for taking time today to join us on our first MDM Quarterly Training Event. A special thank you to both Luis and Nagesh for the wonderful presentations they've provided today for folks. If you are interested in, we will be sending out today's trainings after today's training event is over. Feel free if you would like to go back and revisit today's trainings on YouTube. That will be made public in a little bit of time. I believe we need to get management approval to put that training out there for folks once today's training session has ended. So you can take a look at the training decks we send out, or you can visit, again, the training session today through YouTube once that's available. And also for folks who aren't on our Gov Delivery notifications system yet, MDM did move to Gov Delivery the end of last year. So if you want to get all things Gov Delivery, notifications about all things going on with MDM, as far as our data products, our releases, if we have any issues or system outages, you would need to open up a Gov Delivery account. I am sharing my screen right now for folks who want to see the process. And if you need to, we offer that at MidPug on a monthly basis. So we will be sharing that again in 2 days when we have our next MidPug meeting. So feel free to join us at MidPug as well. So I think that's it for today. If you have any questions, again, feel free to contact Luis or I. We have our email information in today's meeting invite. Feel free to forward any questions you have to either one of us. We'll make sure to get back to you in a timely fashion. We hope you enjoyed today's training sessions again. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Uh-huh.